I was born and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I've lived and worked in New York City for the last 25 years, so right out of college. Even though my paintings are often referred to as landscape paintings, the relationship to the actual landscape is mostly a conceptual one. I'm not interested in rendering a place in oil paint, but rather in creating a dense, highly charged visual event, which is driven by the act of seeing, the process of seeing. I'll go through a few slides, and it's nice that we have paintings in the room, so you're kind of familiar with the way they look and the way they feel. This is this actually is one that is the mate to the big one out in the other room, the same size. And I'll run through the slides and just give you an idea of some of the more recent things like this. This is a longer horizontal one, which is about the same size, but just shorter in height. Over the last 25 years, my work has been a sustained meditation on three dominant things, three dominant inspirations. The first is the light and geography of coastal South Carolina, the Low Country, where I come from. The second is an interest in Irish Celtic art. And the third is the life and the work of the late Canadian pianist Glenn Gould. And I'll try to look at each one of those three and sort of show you how they weave into the work as we go along. For me, those three things are woven together by one idea, the notion of ecstasy, and I'll try to define that a little bit as we go. Each one, I think, is capable of creating the conditions for a gradual, momentary, heightened state of awareness, and I think that's an important component when looking at a painting. I always think of a painting as a kind of glue which binds together the physical world around us with the interior world of our imaginations. The painting is the mediator in between those two places. A painting is communication on a one-to-one level. And for as long as I can remember, I've been inspired by the light and geography of coastal South Carolina. But my work is not about reliving that experience, but about the total possessing of it. I'm going to show you some drawings. The great German artist Walter Sickert said that drawing is about captivity and painting is about freedom. I draw a lot, and my drawings are almost exclusively of trees, academically rendered with simple pencils, often on 8 by 11 pieces of paper, so roughly about that size. I do a lot of these on site, often when I'm down in South Carolina. This was done down in near Beaufort on a place called Spring Island. And I go down there, and I've done residencies there, and they basically give me a house to live in and a golf cart, and I take my radio with NPR and my bug spray and a dozen Krispy Kremes, and I just go off into the woods, and I sit there, and it's like a mobile studio, and I can just draw these trees. I make drawings from nature, especially in South Carolina, because I like the notion that the universal starts local, that it must be something personal to oneself. And I've always felt an affinity towards artists who have a strong relationship to a specific place. If you think of George O'Keeffe with the Southwest, think of the Hudson River School, or somebody like Grant Wood in Iowa. A strong relationship to one geography, one location. And the reason is because that notion of an obsession of returning to one place over and over and over again over years, to me suggests longing for something, an unfulfilled sense of longing, a yearning for something that one never quite gets. That's an important engine in my work, the notion of longing. Another one, looking down a path, very, very quintessential Low Country. A lot of the moss is done with erasing, actually, not with drawing. Sometimes I'll scatter just things on a table, like peppers, in this case. And really, it's just a love of rendering the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface, no more than that. They have no direct relationship to the paintings. They're not studies for anything. They just feel good, and I just do them along the way. Occasionally, figures. I was in Ireland for a year in the late 90s, and I would sometimes meet people and begin to sketch them in person and then finish it with just by imagination or memory. Good rugged faces. Another one. And another one back into the Low Country. My work is very much about place, about location. And the reason I draw trees is not for their timeless beauty, but because I'm obsessed with the moment that the trunk intersects with the ground, that unconditional bulletproof marking of location. It's a vertical thrust into a horizontal context. That moment, I love the trunk when it hits the earth right there. To me, it embodies everything I want in a painting. It's solid, it's unconditional, it's immovable, it's immutable, all those things. I love that moment. and it marks location. That's very important to me, that my paintings enact place, that they don't represent a place, that they are a place. They represent a physical moment, a physical event in time, in the space of the viewer. And I've always felt that I don't need a position in my work because I have a place, I have a location. I was born in the prickly heat of South Carolina in the Low Country. And as a kid, I always thought that I could see the air around me, the air between things. And with humidity, that's actually not so off the mark, And I think, as the older I get, I think the reason I'm a painter is because of humidity. I thought that I could see air like that. And then you try to paint air, which is impossible, but we try. I had the pleasure of growing up near water. And I think all of these things, these beautiful places, taught me how to see. Seeing is different than looking. Seeing is deeper. It's more enduring. It's more complex. I learned about color by azalea bushes, pink and fuchsia azaleas, and I would walk out with my grandfather, probably 5 years old, as far back as I can remember, and I would just bury my face into the pink flowers up to my ears, just to fill my retinas with color, burning color. I think that certainly informs my use of color. I learned about tone, the lights and darks from Spanish moss, the way that light filters through that. I learned about rhythm, which is very important in a painting. I'll talk about from the ocean, from waves, from watching waves over and over. I learned about texture from pluff mud. Anybody knows the marshes, pluff mud. Scooping big heaps of it up like clay in my hands and squishing it between my fingers. And I'd splat it out on the dock and then take colored paper and sprinkle it in there and then squish it again and put more and just create these layered cakes of mud. It just felt good. And when I use paint, I very much think of mud, of sticky mud. You can see it on the left side, on the right side. This place to me was so beautiful I couldn't stand it, and I felt like I had to do something with that, and that led me to begin drawing and painting, and I've never wanted or done anything else. The notion of South Carolina very much informs the way that I compose my paintings, often with a light area at the top, cascading down into a darker, heavier area at the bottom, which is essentially the reverse of what Monet called load and support, where often he would have the light at the bottom with the dark on the top. So one is a load, one is a support. It's really it's a replicating of the orientation that we see nature, light up here and dark down there. You'll notice also in a lot of the paintings there tends to be a lot of information compressed at the edges and then often a proscenium, a stage or a space or a void, usually off-center. And the reason is to create the idea of a picture within a picture, a world inside of a world. The first is the actual rectangle, and then the subsidiary spaces that move inward and inward and inward, a space inside of a space, to pull your eye, to pull your gaze into the painting. I use foreground and background in a couple of different ways. In the traditional sense, all the painters know foreground elements tend to be larger in shape, more resolute in focus, and also brighter or warmer in color. They feel like they're coming forward. The colors get a little cooler as you go back, more grays, purples, magentas, greens, like that, and also smaller in shape. So you suggest the diminution of space, of objects as they get smaller, as they go back. In the conceptual sense, I think of foreground as the physical world, the sticky physical world, the body, the skin. And then I think of the background as the liquid world of the imagination, the private interior world. So there's exterior, interior, again. And there's often very little or no middle ground in the way that I work. I love to jump from very foreground to very background. That's something I learned from the Canadian group of 7, the painters from the 1920s, who worked in and around Toronto, and they would create little small oil paintings of the raw Canadian landscape that they knew so well. It was their identity as Canadians. They would often have only foreground and then only background to give the viewer the impression of being directly in front of nature with nothing in between. It's you and the rawness of nature that comes from that. I have a love affair with color. I use color intuitively. I experiment in lots and lots of mistakes. And I try to push color as far as I possibly can, with strange juxtapositions, levels of intensity. And I like the notion of going overboard, going too far with color. I like effusiveness, almost like too loud in places. And indeed, one of my teachers said that sometimes too much is just right. I love the notion of going overboard. I spend my life going bonkers. And that critics have said before that perhaps is a Southern trait. The notion of it's the humidity again, like that. But the notion of effusiveness and generosity, you see it in literature and in poetry and in painting. I'm thinking of Halsey and J. Bardin and some of the Southern painters, the South Carolina painters. For me, the paint is not in service of the image, but it's the other way around. I don't want to use color to describe a thing. I want to try to use the color as the thing itself. In terms of structure, this is an Asher B. Durand painting, a Hudson River School painting, and you can see that sort of idea of a picture inside of a picture. It's kind of information at the edges and then a tunnel or vortex leading you back. It's not a new idea. It's been used in paintings for centuries, and I love that notion of a chain, a lineage of things that painters do, ways that we construct paintings. It's important to me to study that, to recognize that, and to try to work it into my lexicon, but always maintain a relationship to what came before. I spent a great deal of time fishing as a kid. This is on the pier, and I never was interested that much in fishing, but more so, what I loved was sitting there for long periods of time just looking at the ocean, just empty blue space. And there's something about when you're looking at the ocean or at the sky, you're not really looking at anything in particular. There's no focal point, there's no image to really look at. It's a big expanse of blue. So as I would sit there after hours, it almost became where I felt like I was looking at looking. I was seeing myself seeing, which is an interesting notion to me, and it certainly ricochets us back into painting, that a painting can be not only what you're seeing, but also about the process of seeing. And that was very much about the process of seeing. One of my earliest books that I had when I was a kid was Manet's sea paintings, the sea battle paintings from the 1860s. You might be familiar with these beautiful fields of turquoise and blue, and then the ships in black and pewter battling in these beautiful compositions like this one. And I copied these, and this is like 11 years old maybe, in watercolor. And I wasn't getting it right, the structure right. So what I did is I had my mom go out and buy a turquoise pillowcase, and we stuffed a pillow in it, and I put it on the bed, and then I took rocks, which corresponded to the sizes of the boats and the colors, black, gray, white, and I would place the rocks in the exact places they were in the painting, and I would watch them sink down into the downiness of the pillow. The heavier ones would go further, the lighter ones would go less, and it taught me a lot about displacement and about weight and counterweight, and I really learned a lot about how he composed and constructed these paintings, about how to compose. So while my friends would go out and play basketball after school, I would come home and play with rocks and pillows, like that. I lost my virginity kind of late. I don't know if that's it, but like that. Another big one, again, you can see that sort of almost curtain-like effect with that space, that interior space, and that very frontal space in the foreground. For me, it's not the landscape that interests me, but it's more of my relationship to the idea of landscape, the conceptual idea of a place, of location. And what I mean is if you stand in front of a landscape painting, any landscape painting, what you have is a place, a view of a place, a rectangle or a square looking into a place. So there's automatically a reference to someone standing there looking at that place, and that's both the painter and the viewer. So right there you've got the confluence of two identities, the painter and the viewer looking at this framed place. That's very interesting to me. The painting represents that confluence of a viewer and artist in the same conditions. To suggest the notion of the human element in a landscape, I do things like I'll use high horizon lines, which you see almost in every painting in this show up here. The high horizon gives you the impression of depth and weight and gravity and mortality, as opposed to a low horizon with more of a sky element, which tends to suggest something else, something more uplifting, more ethereal, more eternal. I like the feeling of sticky gravity and weight and mud. Also, I'll use vertical strands. A lot of the times, the ways I start these paintings, I'll put a few tones in, usually darks, and usually in threes, like a 1, 2, and then a 3. Then I'll come in with verticals, maybe 1 or 2. I'll start a bit of a rhythm in the painting, and then 3 and 4, and then I'll start to create information in between those verticals. And you start to create foreground, background, you start to create positive, negative, physical, and then air, the idea of seeing air again. So those verticals very much represent the human orientation in the landscape. And throughout art history, the vertical often refers to the human figure and the horizontal to the landscape. Horizontal paintings, often landscape tradition. Vertical paintings, the figure, the human figure. Also, you'll notice a lot of the verticals are often countered by horizontals. And every time they cross, it makes, for me, a little detonation of energy, a little explosion. And that's part of the way I construct the gaze, the eye. Your eye, as you move through the painting, is these little detonations, these crosses. Each one a little blast of energy, which kind of moves you and crackles and moves throughout the space. Also, the vertical always refers to the edges of the painting, and the horizontal to the top and the bottom. So you're getting a repeating of the structure, of the overall vertical, horizontal nature of the painting, over and over and over again. It's just a restating of the rectangle. And indeed, John Ruskin said that all motion in water elongates reflections and throws them into confused vertical lines. I just throw that in there. I like that quote. And that brings me to the idea of movement. And I want to show you this 1874 Degas painting called The Absinthe Drinker. And we all know that Degas was very interested in the notion of movement, with the ballet dancers, the horse racing, the theater, women bathing. What I love about this painting is the figure is absolutely still, gazing out at us. The movement in the painting is not supplied by her. The movement in the painting is supplied by our eyeballs as we negotiate these dynamic zigzags in the foreground. We bring the movement into the painting. We're implicated in the painting. We have to finish it. We have to do some of the work. It's not provided for us. I like the notion that in that we're included in the envelope of the painting, the perceptual envelope. We have to do part of it. And I love that notion that perhaps the subject here is not what we're looking at, but rather how we look at it, the way that our eyes negotiate the space. Here's a vertical one of mine. Again, you can see that sort of, like the Hudson River painting I just showed, that sort of tunnel effect here, and a very foreground element on this side. This is quite large, so if you can see those grooves, those flutes, that's finger. And you can see that evidence in a lot of these paintings. Also another big one, just sort of a churning, I like Tiepolo a lot, the Venetian painter. And if you look in those ceiling paintings, that swirling liquid energy, I like that feeling. Also another vertical one. I had a lot of trouble with this one, but many, many months later, I think I was able to mitigate that and create something kind of perfumey. I love when other adjectives are brought into to a painting. Perfumey is one of them, or fragrant. I love the notion of fragrant in a painting. The way that I like to construct the paintings, you've noticed, is chunks, big chunks, fragments of color, of pure saturated color. Nothing new, again. Blanche Lazelle, a very interesting printmaker, who came up with a kind of a white line print technique. It's the same kind of notion of stacking. If you think of a deck of playing cards and a card table, if you just dump the cards on the table randomly, they're layered, they're overlapping each other in different directions. That's, in a way, the way I like to construct the paintings, stacking color to create depth and space, but also the feeling of stacking, of layering skin on top of skin. Romeo Bearden, the same thing. Again, just fragmented shapes and stacking of colors, all compressed into a space. The reason I like that fragmented feeling is because I think it suggests doubt and structure over appearance. It's not trying to capture the appearance of something. It's trying to argue and negotiate and make little decisions with little doubts, little uncertainties to try to collapse all that very delicately into a new thing. Not as much about appearance, but about structure and about composition and about self-correcting decisions and other things. But two nice examples of the same way that I approach putting color down. I want to show you a Cézanne painting, The Bathers from 1906, and we're going to pair it with a Veronese etching from the 16th century. It's documented that Cézanne looked at the Veronese for his structure in that painting. This is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's one of my favorite paintings in the world. You'll see there are two groups of figures also in the Veronese. You can see that the foreground plane, and then the river is a second plane, and then the distant bank a third plane. In the Veronese, it's the ground in the front, the table front, which is like the river, and then the tabletop under Christ there is the distant background there. Also, if you notice, about where Christ's head is there's a church, a steeple back here. And also you have that sort of collapsing tent or triangle-like shape, which I use a lot in my paintings. You can see it in the pediment above the head of Christ here, and in the Cézanne very emphatically in the structure here. And in the Cezanne, it's both historical. If you think of Michelangelo's figures, muscular, torqued figures all clustered together like that. But it's also very forward-looking in the elongation of the figures, the simplification of the figures, and the very limited palette, which is essentially raw sienna, burnt sienna, and a range of blue-grays. Because everything is so fragmented and surface-oriented in the Cezanne, you're challenged to look at the surface of the painting. It's not really as much about illusion, it's about a fact of things happening on a surface. In here, in the Veronese, it's linear perspective, which tends to pull your eye back through the lines, which pulls you into space. So in one way, you're looking into this, and you're looking at that. That's kind of a duality I'm interested in my paintings, to try to negotiate both of those. I like the idea that in my paintings, hopefully, you'll find yourself looking into it, into the illusion, into the melting of the space. And then at the same moment, you might be ping-ponged back out and look at the surface. It's very difficult to do both at the same time. It's looking either at or in. And I like the notion of that kind of shifting back and forth, external and internal again. I had a blast with some of these reds in there. Again, another struggle one, and it takes a lot of time. I work on several paintings for a show at the same time. So usually 10 or 12 paintings, they take about 8 or 9 months to do. And I rotate them as I go along. I have a fairly big studio. Again, that high horizon line and kind of stick twig-like things up at the top, which comes from the drawings, I suppose. And I used the Cezanne that we just saw a minute ago to talk about the word abstraction. I don't think of abstraction necessarily as a style. I think of it only as a process, as a verb. Abstraction is something a painter does. I can't tell you that I'm going to make an abstract painting any more than I can say I'm going to do an imitation of breathing. It's impossible for me to think about. The paintings all come from something tangible, something that I know very deeply, and then I use the process of abstraction to try to create this new thing, this world in here. To abstract simply means to remove, which implies that it must be removed from something, from somewhere. I very much consider myself a landscape painter who arrives at my paintings through the process of abstraction. And my teacher, Michael Tyzak, used to tell me, an eye not told what to see, sees more. This goes back about 15 years, and you can see perhaps in terms of palette a bit more of a traditional landscape feeling with the tree-like forms again. Again, another long one that was in the last show in New York. This area of red is this big, so it gives you an idea of the scale. It's a big, big painting. I want to pair this painting of mine next to a 17th century Dutch painting by Ruisdael, one of the great landscape painters. And really just to show you the notion of bending space. I like to talk about bending space again, like fragrance or other words that you can apply to a painting. The way I try to bend space is sometimes to either create a concave feeling or a convex feeling. And in these painters, it was often convex, like a cereal bowl turned upside down. The way they do it often is through lights and darks. And the light, it almost feels like there's a hand behind the painting pushing it out in the middle. I love that notion of that bulging feeling, which often you would see in some of these, the way that these paintings were lit. I did the similar thing in this painting of mine, and it just simply gradating the intensity till it peaks in the center, and then getting darker and duller as you go off to the edges. So almost the reverse of going into the middle, you're coming out the middle, which pushes the edges back. That idea of bending. And I very much look at Dutch painting. This is a close-up of a large painting. I want to talk about the notion of speed. You don't think of the time or speed when you think of a painting. A painting is a plastic object, as Mondrian calls it, a plastic art. The way that I think about speed is the speed of the marks, and I can very much control or regulate that. If you notice, for instance, like this line right here is very broken and fractured in terms of color and texture, very denuded, very chunky and broken. Then if you look at this kind of gray-blue line, it's more intact, and it's a little faster. It takes you from this point to that point quicker, because it's more uniform. Whereas here, you're forced to sort of negotiate a little and dawdle and go a little slower, which also forces you to remain in these areas a little longer. So as painters, there are little things we can do to affect speed, the speed that your eye reads certain passages of the painting. If I want to suggest you to stay in one area a little longer, I'll change the speed of the mark. And it's something I think about in terms of rhythm. Rhythm is important in a painting. I played drums for 30 years. I don't really as much anymore. But when I paint, I'm thinking about percussion, about the way that I apply color in a percussive way, in creating rhythm. Thomas Gainsborough, one of my great teachers at the College of Charleston, Michael Tyzak, and I shared a love of bourbon and jazz music and Thomas Gainsborough. 1727 to 1788. You know these paintings. These are the ones he was famous for. He really a landscape painter at heart, but he did these paintings as well. I love the notion of the composition. I love the sort of diamond shape of the body and the structure of the body, all emanating from the point of the toe in this very artificially lit foreground. And that word artificial is very important to me in a painting. It doesn't feel like a real landscape. It feels like a stage set or something artificial. It's lit artificially almost. It almost feels like from stage lights are lighting this. And then he has that inimitable fluid brushstroke that he was so good at. And he was known for mixing disparate mediums and charcoal and paint, many things together, experimenting with his mediums. And then if you look at some of the landscapes that he did in Bath, like these, and he would often start them with, he would take the equivalent of salad tongs, squeeze a big sponge and dip it into a pot of black or umber, and then mush it onto the canvas, creating these diaphanous, amorphous darks. And that's often the way, as I mentioned before, that I start a painting, is just big mushy darks. Here, and perhaps somewhere else, maybe in the sky, even though it's not there evident anymore. And it creates a sense of weight and density and landscape, the good earth, the heavy earth. I want to talk about the way that the temporal way that I construct the paintings is often a top-down approach. Starting at the top, generally thinner layers, and then as I work my way down in steps, each successive layer slightly overlaps the one before. So by the time you get to the bottom, the paint is thicker and heavier and closer to you, as if you're standing at the bottom of a staircase. The bottom one is right at your feet, and then it goes up and away as you go back. Think of stairs that way. And what it does is suggest the orientation that we live in the world, that there's the bottom down here, and the top goes away from us. Again, very tied to landscape, to the way that we view landscape. If you invert that, as in this Marston Hartley, he takes the scale and the proximity of these shapes and puts the heaviest, closest ones at the top, the clouds, and then the information at the bottom is further away, which creates a sense of disorder, disquiet, like if you took a staircase and turned it on its butt, opposite, like the top is going to fall down on your head, which I think is really interesting in a painting. Just a nice way to look at that idea in Marston Hartley. Irish Celtic art. In 1997, I had the honor of a Fulbright scholarship, and I chose to go to Ireland. I love Irish poetry. I was interested in Irish Celtic art, and also the notion of the landscape, which is so very tied to Irish identity. I had an apartment in Dublin, and I had a studio inside the Irish Museum of Modern Art. So I would go back and forth between those two. And after I'd paint for a couple of days, I would have a backpack with a toothbrush and change of clothes, and I would just get on a bus and go until I felt like getting off the bus and just walk and meet people. And I hitchhiked, and it was great. I drew and painted and just soaked that experience in. And like Southern identity, Irish identity is very much tied to location, to place. In terms of Irish Celtic art, the period I was more interested in was called Latin style, T-E-N-E, marked by these beautiful spirals and zigzags and rosettes, very compact, highly abstracted shapes, often in a small scale. Usually 600 to 400 BC is the year on these. And again, another example of Celtic art in the natural setting, the landscape in the background. So you would just be walking in a field and come up on the Turo stone in this case, and these beautiful abstracted, florid vegetal shapes. Very, very, like talking about the marking of location right there. Centuries just plunked down right there. Some of the Neolithic things, these concentric, circles and lines, dating back to the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, 2500 BC. One of the things I loved a lot about Irish Celtic art is that it has that springy line, that expanding, contracting vitality of line. One of the most salient moments in that year in Ireland was toward the end of the Fulbright. I was walking through a field in County Cavan, and it was hot and sunny, and I was sketching, and I needed to dip down and dip my face like in a little stream to cool off. And I dipped my face about this far, about like the azaleas, about to my ears. And I just felt that gurgling coldness rushing around my face, and then I felt the hot sun on the back. And it felt like I was in two places at the same time, one in the real dry world up here, and then in this gurgling liquid world down there. And I was in the middle of those two. And that to me is, a coalescence occurred of many ideas I had been thinking about in painting, as painting the mediator. Painting is the middle point. It's the negotiator between this world, the physical world, and the interior world. I think beautifully summed up in that moment, that personal moment. So it clarified a lot of things for me. Then when I came back in 1998, you can see sort of that oval shape referring to that experience, the shape of the face, or the shape of the lens of the eye, or in Celtic art, you'll often see that oval shape, a sacred shape. And then all these landscape elements sort of pressing in and out of that. And this about 10 years after that experience, you can still see that intact shape there as well. And very weathery, this one, very Irish. You know, it changes every 15 minutes. Sheets and sheets of color and movement and light. The notion of top and bottom seems obvious as a painter. Of course, a painting has a top and a bottom. But does the top of the painting correspond to the area around our heads? Does the bottom of the painting refer to the area at our feet? Not all paintings subscribe to that. De Kooning here, very much a nature painter, as highly abstracted as this is, it has a top and a bottom. You can see the evidence of a horizon line, or double horizon line at the top. Drips and movements of the paint tend to go down, and the larger elements at the bottom seem to be somewhat stacked in the foreground there as well. If we look at this Sir William Orpin, an Irish painter, a fabulous painter, self-portrait of him, it's not large, it's hard to see. There is the element, the vertical element of the head placed at the top, backlit, so your eyes go right to the head, the backlighting. Then down, all the detail on the floor, the accoutrement, all the bottles and flowers and things of his life, his studio life, at the bottom. There's a bottom and a top. Stanton MacDonald Wright, an American modernist painter. Again, even though this is highly abstracted, it has a stacking feeling as if the bottom and the top are as we see them. The bottom is around our feet, the top is around our heads. So it does apply, no matter if it's more representational or more abstracted. Think of the bottom and the top when you look at a painting. Glenn Gould lived from 1932 to 1982, and he is my role model as an artist. He's not even a painter. He was a Canadian pianist and philosopher. I became obsessed with him in 1994 and just spent years and years and years going up to Canada to read his writings, listen to his recordings. He did videos and documentaries, and he often talks about the notion of ecstasy and its role in the artist's life. He said that the purpose of art is the gradual lifelong of a construction of a state of wonder and serenity. The gradual lifelong construction of a state of wonder and serenity. I love the patience implied in that, and I love the notion of dedication, a slow, gradual learning and unlearning through the arc of one's career as an artist. He knew how to create his life as an artist, and he knew how to protect that life. He was a remarkable pioneer in terms of the performance, the recording, and the interpretation of music in the mass media. And he said that ecstasy is the condition that we aspire to in a work of art. And he defines ecstasy not as a euphoric emotion from listening to music, but a grafting together of two identities, the artist and the spectator, through the terms of the work. It's that momentary heightened awareness, that split-second moment when you almost feel like you step out of your body and then back into it. Two artists, two people brought together in communication one-to-one. He was very much about that one-to-one communication. Ecstasy for me in a painting is bending the laws of nature to fit the laws of art. The laws of nature being this real space, gravity, real light. The laws of nature being flatness, two-dimensional surface. And we try to bend these things to fit into the painting, into the world of the painting. The idea of seeing air. There's no such thing as an air in a painting. It's all paint, it's all surface. But how do you try to bend that real experience into the painting? That, to me, that idea of bending is ecstasy. And the notion of verticals and horizontals that I referred to before. This is a painting of mine from last year. You can see a lot of verticals and horizontals. You can see it in this Picasso etching, the figure, one seated in the vertical orientation, the other in the horizontal. It creates very much, again, that feeling of vertical, horizontal, that detonation when they cross, the two cross. And here in Agnes Martin, almost non-objective, a very highly abstracted image, which has really no top or bottom. It's more like a chart or a map, but very much subscribes, again, to the notion of vertical and horizontal. There are vertical elements, figurative, if you extrapolate, and then horizontal elements, which, again, refer to landscape. If you think of Navajo rugs, the notion of structure and stripes and moving back in space. I love Agnes Martin. Another taller vertical in mine. And you can see, again, the notion of top and bottom, and also vertical, horizontal. Robert Rauschenberg. I've always had kind of a man crush on Robert Rauschenberg. This is from 1955, called The Bed, one of his most famous assemblages. And speaking personally, I had a show at the Butler Institute of American Art in 2001, and he was partially responsible for making that happen. I have a painting in the collection, and he was having a show there at the time and was being toured through the galleries, and apparently really loved my painting. It had never heard of me and wanted to know more about me and my work. And that sort of helped the ball start rolling for that show. So there's a personal connection there. I've always loved his work. I love his sense of humor. I love the idea of the personal, that letting the world in, letting your world be part of the work, the personal. He took literally his bed and put it on the wall. It's his pillow, it's his blankets. He painted on them, and he took something strictly of horizontal context, your bed, put it into a new context, the wall, on the wall. Instigating lots of ideas, and also the notion of there's hardly anything more personal than your bed, and it's right here in a public forum in the context of a work of art. I think it's fascinating. This is a painting of mine which had nothing to do with the bed, but actually I thought the two had kind of a relationship between, so I just paired them together as well. Again, the notion of top and bottom, of dark and light, of vertical and horizontal, and of a feeling of place. Even though it's not specific, it feels like you're there, like there's something specific. Let me go right there. I use a lot of paint because I want there to be a certain resistance to the ideas before you get to them. I want you to have to deal with the paint, with the juiciness, the substance of the paint first. I want you to acknowledge that physical part first. A painting is not a one-hit experience. It's a series of repeated encounters that you come back to, you consider, you look again, then you consider more, and then all in a split second, and then you look again. The more you look, I think the more you get beyond the material into something a little bit deeper. I think gradually you begin to project your vitality onto the paint, onto the surface of the paint. And I think within that moment, there's the opportunity for tender human communication, just for a split second, a one-to-one communication through the terms of the paint. And that, I think, brings to one of the central conflicts in my work. On one hand, I ask you to go beyond the paint, beyond the physical stuff of the paint, to something perhaps a little more ethereal, more internal, and at the same time, I keep your attention very much on the surface. You have to deal with the paint, with the surface, which I think perhaps poses some interesting questions in terms of subject versus object, or image versus form, or spirit versus matter. All those dualities I try to compress into the work. Nothing new, again. It's just something that I explore and I study from history and try to inch forward in my own work. When I look at a painting, there's three things, and I've talked about this before. I'm the first thing, the painting is the second thing. It's critical, and we have to together create the third thing. There has to be a third thing. It's me and the painting, and together there has to be a third thing that we create together. In a split second, it's imperative that it be that third thing. If it's not there, it's dead. The painting's dead. It's what I call the hum. A great painter friend of mine says the painting has to hum. Another one of those strange adjectives, but or verbs. But a painting can hum, I think, when it's calibrated right. When it's right, it hums. That's what I aspire to. When is the moment when outside experience suddenly becomes interior experience? When does an experience out here become private and internal? That split second, that's the moment I want to try to freeze in my paintings, that split second moment between external and internal. And we're going to finish just with a couple shots of my studio. We're on 27th Street between Broadway and 6th in the Flower District. I'm on the 6th floor, so that's my space here. It's about 900 square feet, and that's looking north toward the Empire State Building out that way. It's a beautiful rectangular space, high ceilings, ample light, even though I don't care at all about natural light. I like artificial light. And I work, you can see, the big ones stay in one end of the room for 8 or 9 months. The smaller ones rotate in, that's the office area. There's a horseshoe up there. And I start my day, I get there usually around, I drop the kids at school at 8:30, I go to the gym and breakfast. I'm there usually by 9:45 or 10. And I spend the first hour or so doing correspondence or paperwork and just thinking about what I might be doing the rest of the day in painting. And then I get to work, and then I'm usually out of there by 5 or 5:30 and then back home, generally Monday to Friday. And I like that, these parameters with kids. I tend to be more productive because I have less free time. In the old days, I would work, 16-hour days, and Chinese food would be arriving, and I'd sleep there, and I'd paint, and then all of a sudden I'd wake up, and then yeah. So I didn't know what was dreaming and what was real. You can see a close-up of some of the tables. It's unusually organized here, but it's I'll fix that. Latex gloves, very important if you're oil painters, for your mediums. Try to get used to latex surgical gloves. You can get them at CVS or Duane Reade. The palettes, I work traditional palettes on the hand, and I work several of them at the same time, generally with one hue or two hues on one palette, and then I'll work the tonal ranges of that color, and then another color on another palette, and so on. Brushes in these big crusty buckets. I don't wash my brushes. The small ones I do wash. The big ones I dip. At the end of the day, I wash them off in paint thinner. Then I dunk them in a big tub of hot water with green palm olive in there, and they stay supple and soft and liquid until the next day when I come in. Then I go back into the terps, and then I go to work again. It's hard to see in some of these, but the first thing I do when I get a new brush is I snap it in half. I break it. I like that feeling of a stub of like a primitive tool in my hand. I like there to be less distance between my hand and the surface. I feel more in it that way. And I like the notion of disrespect for my materials. I love what they do. I respect immensely what a brush does, but I don't respect the brush. And the reason is I think it's important I want to make mistakes. I welcome mistakes. Painting is not about solving problems. Painting is about making problems. And that's how you get better as a painter. You can see the floor is just endless problems. That's it for scale, but it's a couple of several inches deep of old mistakes just scraped off. I spent a great deal of time scraping. Lots of mistakes. You can see the room that is divided, the big paintings here, the small there, and then the long card table in the middle, and that's where everything's laid out. The card table is rested, as you can see here, on two suitcases, two black Samsonite suitcases. There it is, close up there. Inside those suitcases are all clothes and some cash money I had when I moved to New York City. In case things didn't work out, I could always just go back like that. So in those are my clothes from 1987 and some money. Like that. Yeah, I'll never open them. Like that. And they actually raise the table up because I'm tall, so I have to have it up higher. So it's a nice idea that notion of moving, of travel, is literally supporting my practice. Some of the mediums, Galkid, linseed oil, liquin, Neo McGilp. The painters will know some of these terms. Cold wax medium. I experiment with different types of mediums, and I mix them often in these kind of Chinese food containers. And more mediums here as well. I use both small tubes for more expensive colors and then big fat 150 milliliter tubes for more copious amounts of color. Lots of brands. I don't have any one brand that I use. And there's one of the palettes close up as well. And they get scraped every night before I go home. And the floor is just, every possible color. It just turns gray after a while.